It goes without saying that Batman is one of the most prolific superheroes in all of media. You know who Batman is. I don't really need to introduce you to who Batman is. But first appearing in Detective Comics is Detective Comics number 27, ultimately being one of, pretty regular superheroes of guys in tights fighting against bad guys, would ultimately evolve throughout the many decades since his first appearance to become what we know him as now. There have been many variations of the characters, and there's a lot of different ideas of how Batman should be. Fact is, there really is no one idea of Batman and one idea of how he should be, and that's very clear from what we're talking about today. Batman was known as one thing to a good majority of people, thanks to the fact of the amazing and cheesy Adam West Batman series back in the 60s. So much to the point that Batman himself had kind of evolved in the comics throughout the 70s to be a certain way. Batman, even though he would still wear blue, even though he actually was wearing black, but that's just the way, shading worked at the time, but, the blue, would ultimately be a character that would attempt to be a little bit more serious. As comics would get a little bit more serious and would be allowed to be more serious late 70s throughout the 80s, we would be able to get a Batman that fans really wanted to see a little bit more of a darker version of, but the general public kind of still knew as, a goofy superhero, and how a lot of producers thought the same way as well. But some people wanted to see that darker Batman come into frame. This is how we would get 1989's Batman, of course directed by the very man who, a little bit before this, helped make Pee-wee. Welcome back to Through the Arrowverse, a series where I'm going through everything vaguely related to the Arrowverse that was on the CW, which of course at the time of making this has ended, so why am I still making these? I don't know, because I started and I might as well keep going. Considering the fact that the Superman movie recently released, I thought might as well get back into doing the thing that I started, so thus I'm continuing with where I left off with Batman. Today we're looking through the Tim Burton made and then Joel Schumacher ended little quadrilogy of Batman films that were from 89 all the way till its conclusion in 95? 97 with Batman and Robin, and how it went from one whole degree from serious to the whole other direction, and how exactly this has affected Batman as a whole and how most people view Batman till today. At the point in the late 70s, Batman popularity was beginning to wane. CBS was interested in producing a Batman in Outer Space film, which why? But producers Benjamin Melkner and Michael Uslan ultimately bought the film rights of Batman in order to make something which was more in touch with the actual comics. This definitive dark Batman movie, which would finally really portray Batman as he was initially intended all the way back in, DC Comics 27, when he was initially made. But of course, as mentioned, a lot of people, especially producers, believed Batman as one particular thing. Thanks to the campy 1960s series, a darker Batman wasn't really what people wanted to see, and thus it wasn't picked up. Producers John Peters and Peter Guber joined the project, and with enough money thrown at it, they were finally able to get Warner Brothers to pick up the project. This is really kind of the beginning of the Warner Brothers DC relationship, and how eventually they would become, one singular thing. People think of one, they think of the other. Things kind of work that way, like what eventually would happen with friggin' Mortal Kombat. You have a weird little idea, they go, oh, you're failing? Boom, bought ya. Tom Mankiewicz, who of course did help make the 78 Superman film and several James Bond films, was brought on to write a script just called The Batman, made in 83, focusing on Batman and of course Dick Grayson Robin, which is weird that considering all the way back here, Robin was supposed to be part of these movies. It was going to involve Joker, Rupert Thorne, and Silver St. Cloud, characters that you may or may not have heard of if you were reading the comics during the time. He took inspiration from the Batman Strange Apparition series written by Steve Englehart, and the comic book artist for that was actually hired for the concept art, which I will hopefully find and put on screen. With a budget of over $20 million, it was eventually, of course, tooled into what it would later be through various changes, which, just naturally happens in movies. You don't take that first script, you get a whole other man to rewrite the whole thing, and hopefully it's anything close. 9 rewrites were performed by 9 separate writers. Most of them were based on Strange Apparitions, but it was Mankiewicz's script which was really the guiding idea. Several ideas of who was going to be in this initial early 80s version never came to pass, but it would have been funny to see William Holden for Detective Gordon, David Niven as Alfred, and Peter O'Toole as the Penguin. Would have been so weird. Ivan Reitman and Joe Dante were almost the directors. Reitman wanted Bill Murray to be Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin. And considering the fact that it was almost going to be directed by Wes Craven, that would have been the movie that would have probably killed Batman. As it was eventually revealed that Tim Burton would come to direct, people were like, that's weird. Didn't he just make Pee-wee? Giving more inspiration from The Dark Knight Returns, the recently made successful graphic novel, alongside a similarly successful and recent graphic novel, The Killing Joke. You can really see this inspiration throughout the movie of this is that Joker abso-goddamn-lutely. Mind you, Burton, not a comic book fan. Weird to say considering how weird that man is, but he's weird for different reasons. He approached Sam Hamm, who is a comic book fan with a crazy name, to ultimately write the screenplay, and he would have a whole other idea of where to go. He'd bring in Vicky Vale and change Rupert Thorne with his own character. Carl Grissom, who would later in the movie be played by Jack Palance, actually stayed all the way to the last version of this script, so, a lot of what he wrote ultimately became the movie. Warren Scarron, who helped make Burton's Beetlejuice, did some rewrites, mid-filming, which of course changed lots of the things, especially involving Robin and the Penguin and other different things which are no longer in the finished product. Now, because Beetlejuice came out the same year earlier in the year, people kind of saw that a darker tone, is possible from the guy who helped make Pee-wee, but even then they were like, Burton seems like a weird idea, and especially it's weirder that Michael Keaton is the actor. Yeah, if you think that people are too sensitive nowadays and complain about casting too much now, just you fucking look at the fact that there were so many write-ins to DC to change the actor when the guy that everyone knows as the best live-action Batman, and you can quote me on that, and when you as someone who's, been born after 89, you don't understand, but Michael Keaton, like the 2 other guys that would be Batman later, that people would also complain about in more modern times, was mostly known for not action films and being a pretty boy who couldn't possibly be believable as Batman. Who does that sound like? 2 other guys who were good Batmen. See, I can be nice to Snyder fans because, I'm not a stupid comic book fan that would write into the fucking company to get a person recasted or for a whole thing to be rebooted or whatever the fuck comic book fans keep just doing to keep looking stupid. And again, it's always been this way forever. If it isn't clear from the last Batman video that I did, comic book fans are never happy, ever. It was also almost Mel Gibson, Kevin Costner, Charlie Sheen, Tom Selleck, Harrison Ford, and Dennis Quaid, which I feel like are names that I hear all of the time when it comes to who was almost casted. Willem Dafoe was never meant to be Joker, and in fact, the initial immediate idea was the man who they eventually did cast. But they also thought about Tim Curry, David Bowie, John Lithgow, Ray Liotta, James Woods, and Brad Dourif, who you may know as another crazy screaming man. And yes, Jack Nicholson is the absolute best choice for who you could have went with in mid-late 80s actors to be the Joker. Sean Young was almost Vicky Vale, but a horse riding accident basically made it go to the actress who they eventually casted, who of course was Kim Basinger. And honestly, yeah, she's great in this movie, as of course is Michael Gough, who was then casted as Alfred, a notable actor who had did some great shit for Hammer Films in their awesome horror films. He is the one actor to basically be in all 4 of these movies, and it's really the reason why all 4 of these movies are connected. A lot of people pretend that these things aren't in the same universe, but that's the same Alfred. P.S. He's the best live-action Alfred. Burton, who was impressed with the design of Neil Jordan's Company of Wolves, really wanted to hire their production designer, Anton Furst, for Beetlejuice, but wasn't able to, due to the fact that he was making the High Spirits. Yeah, the prolific comedy film High Spirits. But thankfully, he was able to hire him for Batman. First in the art department, like mixed architectural styles to make Gotham really feel like the ugliest thing ever, which was the whole point of the movie, to really show that this Gotham was a city that was just absolutely destroyed and ridden with crime, and it's the kind of city that needs a hero like Batman. They just made it look like this awesome looking Gothic architecture, this like run down ancient city that hasn't been improved on for years, because what's the point? There's so many of these crazy criminals are running around, we can't even get in there. Julian Caldo designed the Batmobile to really have it be this like gadget-filled machine with a big jet engine turbine in the front of it. It is my favorite design for a Batmobile. I love the big jet engine turbine, I love how sleek it looks, and goddamn, if I ever had the chance, I would drive it. I hope I wouldn't crash it, but I want to drive it. If I have one dying wish, it is to drive this Batmobile, or at least the one from like 2 movies from now. Bob Ringwood would ultimately help design this Batman costume to help it look, you know, more intimidating and dark, and basically allowed it to form around Michael Keaton's build, as Michael Keaton was a more like thinner, more average looking guy rather than this big bulky dude in spandex. And they decided to go with this big latex suit, which unfortunately was very uncomfortable for Keaton, who was very claustrophobic. Due to how dark and latexy it was nearly impossible to move your damn neck, so when you see him looking around in the movie, he's often moving his whole ass body up and down in order to see anything. Finally, this movie is of course the notable beginning of Danny Elfman's career. He was previously just in the band Oingo Boingo, and while he had helped make Burton before, this is really when Hollywood goes, hey, hold on, that guy, whoa, hold on. Eventually resulting in Danny Elfman making some of the best scores in all of film, or at least the most notable ones. In our first film that really introduces us to the Burton-Schumacher-verse version of Batman, we got Vicky Vale looking into the sights of this Batman, who people think looks a little bit like a Batman, and she's here for a fundraiser which is being held by billionaire Bruce Wayne, who certainly is not Batman, but he is definitely in love with Vicky Vale, a relationship that will certainly continue throughout the sequels. Meanwhile, the mob boss, the like biggest one of the city or something, Carl Grissom, sends his second-in-command Jack Napier to break into the chemical plant, which in reality is just, you know, meant for him to fall in the vat and go, The corrupt police lieutenant Max Eckert is basically in part of this, but thankfully Commissioner James Gordon is able to take command of the raid and tries to, you know, capture Napier alive. Batman shows up in the middle of it because of course he does, he's Batman. And it is through this that Napier falls into the vat and eventually, you know, gets a little bit weird looking. Napier then goes by the Joker and meets up with his old boss and kills all of them. He is crazy. He starts lacing this goo into various hygiene products. He calls it Smilex, and basically it makes people die laughing. You know, a very Joker-y plot to do. He also starts becoming crazy about Vicky Vale and brings her to the museum. This leads us to probably one of the best scenes of the movie, in that, you know, Bruce tries to protect Vicky and almost reveals that he is Batman, but in the process, the Joker shows up and gives us the best line ever.
You ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight?
Which is only in response to the other best line of the movie.
And he had a...
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
And in this process, he figures out that, you know, the Joker is the same man who actually happened to kill his parents. I like this little addition. You know, it is definitely weird to make a world too small, and I do prefer to have the comics and any other Batman have it just be a random mugger, because, you know, having it be anything special gets rid of what makes Batman interesting, is the fact that, you know, crime continues to happen and it has no real face to it. And it's the fact that he needs to be that face to make sure that crime doesn't happen. But having it happen to be the Joker is, you know, isn't like a bad thing. Obviously, Joker is not Joe Chill, but he is Jack Napier in the comics, whose backstory is incredibly unclear, and though was in The Killing Joke in some degree, people believe this is mostly just the Joker being the Joker, just not being clear about anything about himself. God knows there are worse things they could do with the Joker in the comics than have him end up being the guy who actually killed Batman's parents, to be honest. Vicky's taken to the Batcave and she hangs out with Alfred for a bit. This is when Vicky figures out that, Bruce is Batman, which, was obvious after you are with a man and then you happen to be saved by Batman. I wonder. Getting in his Batmobile, he goes to Joker's main little area, fights him with his big-ass gun in his crazy parade float, tracks him down to the cathedral, and over the next 2 levels, fights his goons, and fights him over on top of it, ultimately knocking him down and not killing him because the gargoyle does. By the way, the Joker does fall to his death, and Batman is able to save Vicky, who decided to go there in the middle of it, by the way, but whatever. Gordon then, wraps the thing up, arrests all the rest of Joker's goons, essentially, dismantling the criminal empire of Carl Grissom, remember that character, and then makes the bat signal and starts working with this presumably deputized vigilante. It's presumed that, Bruce and Vicky will get together, but as mentioned, she is never seen again. I do believe they do try to explain what happened to her in the sequel, but it's whatever. Now, Batman 89, of course, did incredibly well, as it should. Batman 89 is a great and faithful depiction of what Batman is, and due to it, it became what people would know as Batman. This would essentially change everything about the general public's perception about not just Batman, but superheroes. The fact that they could be these big action stars like they had seen throughout the 80s, and they could be darker and more serious, continued to help comics be able to develop more serious and more epic storylines for the good and the bad, but more importantly allowed Batman to first off wear darker clothes, A, and B, be able to be more darker. The series in the comics began to take more of a turn, which began to look more like these movies. Comics just like to do that whenever movies show up based on them. They'll introduce characters that the comics didn't originally have so that people who are now reading the comics can go, oh, the 89 movie is a fantastic movie. I love the 89 Batman film. It's an absolute blast. It has some amazing cinematography and directing with the fact that all of these characters give off this very comic booky vibe of this cool noir feel in it, and Tim Burton just has during this era this certain feel to him in this weird dark noir style, right? That allows itself to have this wacky without being too goofy feel to it and have it feel natural in this otherworldly place that is Gotham. You believe that this man who has been injured in such a way can be this crazed criminal and have this strange plan and have this weird wacky stuff in it and have it still be something you can take seriously due to the way it's framed. Batman 89 is, of course, an incredibly entertaining film. It is very important for the history of Batman, but it isn't necessarily the greatest superhero movie of all time. I would definitely put it pretty high. It is incredibly enjoyable because it's Tim Burton making Batman into a more serious movie in which it really should be, right? A lot of fans really enjoy that this was a thing at all, and a lot of fans enjoy this movie, both when it was made and till today. It's a movie that I would say you have to watch. It is a really good Batman film, even if it is not necessarily the best superhero film or the best film of all time. Visually, it is stunning. I love the set design. I love the character design. It is phenomenal. The directing and cinematography are fantastic and lead to some great shots. And though there are some fun lines, the writing is really the problem with the film. It is not the smartest written film of all time, certainly not. Though the acting is really good, as all the actors are giving it their all here, especially the Joker. God's sakes, man. That man, oh my god. But it is not the smartest written film of all time. In fact, in some ways, it might be a little bit too generic. It is a very basic storyline without any real character arc towards its conclusion, and though it does give a really good showing of what Batman is and what makes Batman work, it doesn't do anything further than that. Mind you, I think all a superhero movie needs to be is a guy in suit beats up bad guys, and thus it is an incredibly enjoyable film, because we get some good action scenes that, can be better, but they give me enough of what I want to see and do a good job doing it. And when I care about the characters enough to watch your movie, that's what I care about. But you could really do more than just have a superhero film be a superhero film. It could be better to have a genuine character arc, to have your romance even be believable at all, or have any more from any of the other side characters who really just feel like they're there to help Batman. It does feel a little bit sacrilegious to shit a little bit on 89, but it should be noted that 89 is not a perfect film, nor is any film. That's really the important thing to look at these films when you watch them. There are parts that are imperfect, but despite those parts, it is still an awesome movie. It's a badass Batman film that, again, if you haven't already seen this movie, it's a must-watch for Batman fans. It's great looking, it's enjoyable, and it's fucking Batman in the, some of the most enjoyable ways possible. Sure, it might be, cheesy in ways that you would think that it wouldn't have done, considering it's trying to be more serious, but it balances out in such a way where it is this, Tim Burton style of dark humor, which he did his best during this era. Following the obvious success of Batman in 1989, Warner Brothers were pretty confident in the fact that a sequel would also do pretty well. Immediately, filming began soon afterwards, and the studio wanted Robin Williams and Danny DeVito to be the Riddler and the Penguin. Yes, Danny DeVito as the Penguin all the way this early, and immediately at the beginning of pre-production, which I find very interesting. They actually kept the exact same sets. They didn't take down any of the sets from the first movie. They kept them up and kept them under 24-hour surveillance just in case, because it was more cost effective. I'd kind of love if more movies did that sort of thing. Tim Burton actually didn't want to do a sequel. He actually was pretty wary about sequels. The sequels not being a regular thing. Yeah, that makes sense. Sequels could, end up being very bad, but sure. Ultimately, after deciding that he wasn't going to do it, they kind of kept it off for a bit, as he then went to make Edward Scissorhands and Nightmare Before Christmas. Sam Hamm, the writer of the original movie, of course wanted Harvey Dent to be Billy D. Williams and was trying to build a whole arc with the guy, which would have possibly had went into a third film made by Burton, which, as you know, never really happened. But that kind of is continuing to be built here, and due to the fact of his early scripts involving him, that's a part of it that actively still remained all the way to the eventual release of the movie. Of course, in the initial draft, there would have been a continuing of the Vicky Vale relationship, and Catwoman was, of course, even since the beginning, very sexualized, but maybe even more in his version, which is just kind of funny, right? He clearly is a comic book fan. In 91, Burton, of course, did agree to return, but only if he decided what was going to happen and who was going to be in it. The idea of finally introducing Robin, gotten rid of. Sexy Catwoman, that can certainly stay. Vicky Vale, Basinger's not returning. Fuck it. Danny DeVito as Penguin, abso-goddamn-lutely. And he's not going to be some kind of thing that's going to be like the ones from the comics. Who reads comics? Let's make him a weird creature with friggin' thin hands and make him absolutely weird. It became a little bit darker and weirder and maybe even a little bit cynical, and kind of was fought back by Keaton, who didn't really like that part of the dialogue, ultimately trying to keep his character more like how he was in the first one. They then created Max Schreck, a character who was not in the comics till obviously, then in the movie where they could shove him in to kind of take the place of what Harvey was going to do and be the villain who was going to help out with stuff with Danny DeVito Penguin. Shrek was, of course, immediately Christopher Walken, who based his performance over Vincent Price, which is the reason why it's pretty different than other Christopher Walken roles. Many actresses wanted to be Catwoman, but obviously, eventually it was given to the person who was probably the best choice, to be honest. Michelle Pfeiffer, who, of course. Thus, we have the crazier and darker Batman than even the previous one, which some people kind of didn't jive with when it came out. We begin with a little flashback of showing Pee Wee Herman, who plays Oswald Cobblepot's father, who ultimately just throw their kid in the sewer, and he's eventually found by some birds that live in the sewer. It's weird. Fast forward 30 years later, the Red Triangle Gang kidnaps Shrek, which is a group of circus workers that I at least headcanon think are maybe base themselves off of the Joker, you know? That's at least what I think. But they're, of course, working with Oswald, now known as the Penguin, who blackmails Shrek with evidence of him being, you know, as corrupt as he is. Corrupt as he is, he's like, actually, I fuck with you pretty heavy. Let's just be friends. You want to be mayor? And, you know, the Penguin's like, maybe I do want to be mayor. After the Penguin basically makes Shrek tell him who he actually is, and he finds out that he was from a rich family, this is where they kind of begin their plot. Mostly Shrek attempts to just like use this to get him off of his back and also, you know, make him look like a total idiot, which will certainly not backfire later. Meanwhile, he tries to get rid of his secretary, Selena Kyle, after pushing her out of a window. This is because she finds out a little bit about, you know, why exactly he's corrupt in terms of trying to construct a power plant that would essentially take away power from the people of Gotham. And after getting shoved through a window, Selena survives and now is suddenly a lot more confident and still equally as sexy as she was 3 seconds ago, immediately capturing the attention of always horny Bruce Wayne, who, as you know, is Batman and is going against the Red Triangle gang, ultimately bumping into Catwoman, who of course Michelle Pfeiffer is also, after she goes home and staples together a bunch of leather straps that she had or something, in what is one of the most interesting and different looking outfits that Catwoman has ever had, and she's had some weird costumes in the comics, especially after this movie comes out. While Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne start dating in the regular non-superhero part, fortunately, Catwoman then starts working with the Penguin in order to essentially ruin Batman's reputation. The Ice Princess, the, like, beauty queen of Gotham, is kidnapped by the Red Triangle gang. Unfortunately, it is sabotaged and Batman nearly dies, but he lays a little trap, ultimately recording Oswald's crazy tirade against Gotham citizens, and then he plays it during his big rally. And then he makes a plan to try and abduct all of Gotham's firstborn sons and kill them. Very dark, Penguin. Meanwhile, Selena continues doing Catwoman stuff just on her own, because no longer working with the Penguin, because the Penguin's obviously the Penguin, so why were you working with the Penguin? As she tries to really do her main goal, which was to kill Shrek in the first place. Obviously, Wayne tries to stop her, and he soon finds out that Selena Kyle is Catwoman. Penguin obviously takes advantage of this, tries to kidnap people, and also send missile-equipped penguins, which is a scene that did use fake penguins, but also for a little bit of it, real penguins, and obviously not real missiles, but PETA was angry anyway. So, after stopping the missile-controlled penguins and going now in the sewer with this, like, version of the Batmobile that can just fly out in the sewers, Batman fights the Penguin with his swarm of bats that he sure has, seemingly killing the Penguin, and then he tries to stop the Catwoman from killing Shrek. After she gets shot, she gets up and survives, and then kills Shrek. She's seemingly fine. Also, so is the Penguin. Nobody can die except apparently Shrek. But don't worry, the Penguin is dead, and Catwoman gets out of there. If she's still alive, who knows? Maybe the Catwoman movie will show us what happens to her. Oh, that's right, it has nothing to do with this version of Catwoman, and also it's the worst thing I've ever seen. Uh-oh, oopsie. Batman Forever did pretty well, but it was also the beginning of the change of the franchise. It was a little bit different than what, you know, DC and Warner Brothers really wanted it to be. It was a lot darker, so much to the point that McDonald's had to cancel their little Happy Meal toy deal with them, which, oh no, not the Happy Meal toys. But it was a showing of that Warner Brothers wanted a different look for this series, which is weird considering not only has this movie really been embraced in the decades since, but also this is the kind of Batman that people want to see. This darker, grittier Batman with a darker, grittier, and maybe even more messed up storyline. The current recent Batman certainly has some crazy, darker stuff. And while they have their own versions of weird or dark or violent, they are still something you wouldn't make like Happy Meal toys off of. As we know, the best Happy Meal toy was the one from Inspector Gadget, where you can merge them all together into one Inspector Gadget man, and none of them have beat it since. And though it was certainly successful and did warrant a sequel, they decided to go a very different direction in the sequel, ultimately fearing that, you know, it wouldn't be as profitable the next time if it was like this one. And more than likely, the lack of profitability for any future sequels was probably blamed on the slightly different direction of this sequel. That being said, I love Batman Returns. Batman Returns is absolutely awesome. I find it weird, dark, and gritty, and strange. It's incredibly enjoyable the entire time. It's a similar idea with the '89 one. Sure, not necessarily all parts of the dialogue are the best written things of all time, but I find it a lot deeper and more interesting than the previous movie. This one is better than the one in '89. It's certainly less like a regular superhero film. The romance in this one is also not necessarily the best written or deepest of all time, but there is something there between these two. There is actual chemistry between these two actors, and you do care about it towards the conclusion. Batman and Catwoman are just this like weird natural yin and yang relationship that through all versions of it has always been very interesting. That being said, obviously there are better versions of these characters, better versions of this romance. I want to say better versions of the Penguin, but there just isn't. Danny DeVito just gives it his all as this just messed up mutant of a man who you understand why he hates people. They threw him out the way he did. And when he meets his parents and he's like, you suck. You feel that, you know? I love Danny DeVito as the Penguin. It's funny that he gets hit by bats and falls in a hole and dies, you know? But you know, despite everything, yeah, this movie isn't necessarily perfect, but it really takes all of the awesome visuals and architecture and this cool gothic noir feel of that first one, and takes it and ups it in such like a more Burton direction. This feels so Burton. Like Burton at his best is this movie. This like dreary, dark humor, messed up movie. Cool superhero action. It is better looking and better paced than the previous one. The action feels more natural because they clearly went in a different direction in terms of how to do the action. The music is still Danny Elfman and is still really great, and they even go further with the sets, but not too far, you know? It still feels like a sequel to the previous one, but also in a way, its own thing. This is a separate Batman than the previous one, almost. And that was on purpose. Burton didn't want to make a sequel to the other one in the way of we're doing the same thing again, you know? This feels like he did take what he wanted to do and just go weird with it, and I completely respect it. This dreary vibe mixes well with the like Christmassy feel of Batman Returns. Batman Returns is a Christmas movie. It's set during Christmas. It uses a lot of its like emotional impact towards family and this lack of belonging and this lack of knowing oneself and how that affects both the heroes and the villains wraps around through Christmas, and it's a pretty important part of the actual plotline. So it is a Christmas movie, and it just works so incredibly well. To be honest, there's obviously debate on which is the best Batman film, and I'm not entirely sure what I would say the best Batman film, but Batman Returns has to be right up top there for one of the best Batman films. It feels like what I want to see from Batman in terms of its dark noir feel and how the characters are written and how they treat this weird situation that they find themselves in, this crime-ridden city which doesn't care about you, and the people are wronged and they feel like they have to lash out, and that's the kind of villains I want to see. Understandable in such a way where you know where they're coming from, even if you can still see what they're doing is wrong. Absolutely one of the best Batman films, and definitely one of the best superhero films in existence, right? I had to really struggle to really say that '89 wasn't really as good as people say that it is, because ultimately people do hype it up a little bit than I feel. But it is still incredibly enjoyable. But I'm not gonna be saying too much bad about fucking Batman Returns, all right? It is awesome. I'm gonna say it's awesome, you know? And that's not even like nostalgia. I'm not even like the biggest Batman fan of all time. This is an awesome movie if you haven't already seen it. Even if you're not a Batman fan, if you're new to Batman, maybe not the best place to start because it is a little bit too weird in places. But if you like Batman even a bit, this is the right Batman movie to watch. It's awesome. Absolutely must watch for superhero fans, for DC fans, for Batman fans. Due to the fact that Returns didn't do as much as the original, even though it was still successful and the whole, Happy Meal tie-in thing, they decided to not go with Tim Burton in terms of making a new one, making a third one with someone else, and thus Joel Schumacher. While he was filming The Client, he ultimately decided to come aboard and see what he'd do with Batman. He teamed up with Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor, who are ultimately big fans of Batman from the comics, deciding that it would be a little bit more like the brighter ones from the mid-70s. They decided to actively meet with Burton a bit and kind of, agree of what Batman is and how he should be portrayed in the movies. That it's not just Batman is Bruce Wayne, that they are two separate parts of himself. Not like a Two-Face thing, but the idea of bringing Two-Face, due to the fact that it was in the earlier scripts, was brought aboard, alongside, of course, the Riddler, but not Edward Nygma, but Lyle Heckendorf, and you'd be in Heck-Tech? Stupid. Keaton was gonna return for this version of the movie, and Schumacher was hoping that through this there would be some sort of adaptation of Frank Miller's Batman, and though parts of it were seemingly included, and with it maybe being Scarecrow instead of the Riddler, with the Scarecrow maybe being Brad Dourif, and maybe Catwoman would be returning. But after the incredibly unclear direction on where the sequel was going, Michael Keaton didn't return. Rene Russo was not casted as Chase Meridian, which he was almost going to be. So they decided to pick someone younger for both roles. It was almost going to be Ethan Hawke, who, because he turned it down, regretted it so much that he decided to be Batman in Batwheels several decades later, which, okay. Alongside them, William Baldwin, Ralph Fiennes, Daniel Day-Lewis, with finally that going to Val Kilmer. Warner Bros. Wanted to go with someone who they thought was younger because they thought that Rene Russo was, quote, too old to be paired with Kilmer. After almost Jean Triplehorn and Linda Hamilton, they decided to go with Nicole Kidman. Instead of picking up Billy Dee Williams as Two-Face again, probably because they didn't even think about that fact, Schumacher decided to put in Tommy Lee Jones, although almost Al Pacino, Clint Eastwood, Martin Sheen, and Robert De Niro. I don't know who I would have preferred out of any of these guys. Robin Williams, for like the third time, was almost in these movies as once again almost the Riddler, but Williams actually turned it down. What was he doing in the late 90s? Probably well enough. Michael Jackson wanted to be the Riddler, and that would have been awesome. But it was given to the clear second choice of second funniest comedian in the 90s, Jim Carrey. Robin, who again was almost in the previous two movies, was finally brought together, and though Marlon Wayans was going to be the character beforehand, Schumacher went, but he's not white. So ultimately, they were going to put Leonardo DiCaprio. That obviously didn't happen. Wonder what he was doing in the late 90s. Matt Damon, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, Mark Wahlberg, but Chris O'Donnell was casted instead. Alongside a new Batmobile, an entirely different look was made for Schumacher's Batman movies, with a darker, bleaker, rundown city look of the original two, completely being gone for this new comic booky, almost like music video looking like neon city, which twists and turns in incredibly odd ways, and in several times is portrayed by weird CGI scenes which show weird-ass statues that I don't think would have ever been fucking designed ever in big cities. I say that, but weird, giant, creepy-looking statues are all over the place in the world, and some are currently being built. Throughout all of this, production was not very fun to go through. Schumacher really didn't get along with a lot of the actors, especially Tommy Lee Jones, that didn't get along with fucking anybody, and certainly not Jim Carrey. Yet, despite them looking like they're having a lot of fun on screen, and them being some of the most fun parts of the movies with them just out-weirding each other, they clearly did not like each other. Then again, Tommy Lee Jones didn't like anybody, so that just made sense. The movie, I feel, is actually incredibly simple. It's just kind of Batman is now going to stop the recently deciding he is a bad guy Harvey Dent, whose origin is not fully explained, at least not completely. It's kind of said in the movie after he stops Two-Face, but not really, and honestly, they should have kept Billy Dee Williams, because at least we would have been like, oh yeah, that guy from previous movies. But now he's just that. Did his disfigurement not only make part of his face purple, but also the rest of it white? Either way, don't question the recasting, and don't question the recasting of Bruce Wayne, who again, now looks like a different man. He employs Edward Nygma, who actively really hates his job in such a way that I find so incredibly relatable.
Caffeine will kill ya!
He's actually incredibly smart, but no one wants to give him a chance with his weird inventions. And after Bruce goes, this is a weird invention, Ed just starts going absolutely insane.
Always horny Bruce Wayne, of course, meets up with criminal psychologist Chase Meridian, who basically says that Batman's psychotic, but that doesn't stop Bruce from inviting her to a date to the circus.
And they're looking at the Flying Graysons. Nothing bad ever happens to the Graysons.
After Two-Face tries to blow up the entire circus, Dick, the youngest of the Graysons, is able to stop the bomb from exploding everyone, but unfortunately isn't able to stop the rest of his family from getting killed.
And Bruce decides to take him in. In the comics, of course, Bruce takes him as a ward because, he's like 15, but here he's, clearly a grown-ass man, so sure.
Also, Dick Grayson in this movie is very Jason Todd coded. Like, obviously, Dick Grayson wasn't necessarily the guy that would do everything Batman wanted him to do, and obviously rebelled later, and that's how, he started the Titans and became Nightwing and all that. But Jason Todd just was a very particular way, and that's very much how the Robin in these two movies are.
Easily finds the fact that Bruce is Batman, and
he also straight up steals the Batmobile and then goes off to the crazy Neon City and fights these skeleton neon guys, which again, very, very Jason Todd.
He wants to help him join, but Bruce is like, no, Dick, you're too young. The Riddler then goes to Two-Face's weird two-faced base because everything he has is one side or the other, as is this movie's weird architecture. And the two start committing crimes. You might think that Batman might want to do something about this, but ultimately, Batman, who goes to make sure Chase is okay, she's like, I really like that Bruce guy, which ultimately Bruce goes, maybe I should stop being Batman. But once it's Halloween and the Riddler and Two-Face dress up as kids, Alfred somehow believes them and lets them into the manor, and then that allows them to get into the Batcave. Bruce goes, all right, Dick, you can help out. Suit up, get in this leather outfit that's way too tight for us. And they together go off and fight the Riddler and Two-Face, ultimately fighting them separately in some admittedly fun fight scenes. And Two-Face is dead, probably. Riddler has went absolutely crazy, even more so, and now Batman and Robin are together. Batman is forever. Batman! Now, Batman Forever isn't a bad movie. It isn't a great movie either. When compared to either of the previous two, it doesn't compare, right? It is a much more toyetic, as some have said. It clearly does take inspiration from the 60s Batman series, which they have admitted, and it is a lot more purposefully fun and weird and wacky, and in that places, it can be fun, right? Jim Carrey absolutely gives it his all. He is great as the Riddler. That is awesome. And him and Harvey Dent, Two-Face, Tommy Lee Jones are very fun, but not a great movie, right? The actual relationship is stupid. The fact that Batman almost gives up being Batman because of lady he barely has any chemistry with is stupid. The fight scenes are certainly more action-packed and try to be a little bit more hard-hitting, as the suit is clearly better designed for a person to move around in, but even then the, Schumacher's directing doesn't do a good job actually portraying it. It's almost a little bit too easy for them to take down all the goons, of which, yeah, there certainly is quite a bit of them. The villains ultimately don't really have too much of an actual point to them because they are just kind of wacky goofballs doing a big evil plan. There's not a lot of nuance to this film. It is just kind of almost a bit too stupid because there are parts that are fun, and then there are parts where like, shut up. And then that's what this kind of movie is. And Robin is certainly the most pointless part of this movie. It sets up his origin, sure, but unlike Batman's origin story, which was done very well in '89, Robin's just isn't, right? It's just, it doesn't have that same impact in terms of mirroring what made Batman begin his crusade and why he would care about Robin so much, and due to him being clearly a grown-ass man, it just doesn't hit the same way. Them teaming together by the end, I think, was a neat little moment, but by that point, you're like, do I really care about this guy? And this new Batman, played by Val Kilmer, is so different of a character that you're like, what? Like, yes, he's so weird. He's a little bit of, like, a reclusive guy in the previous ones, but he's just a whack job in this one. Bro's, like, hanging by his feet like a bat. You're like, what are you doing? There was clearly an attempt to try and do something a little bit deeper with the character that ultimately was lost in translation. It just isn't there. And you can tell in places that several of these actors just didn't care when it came to actually making this movie. Now, of course, this movie was changed in its edit, and there's various deleted scenes of which we have seen, including Batman seeing a big old bat or something, and people believe that this might try to answer a little bit more about Batman's psyche and his feelings about the whole thing, but like, it wouldn't change much of the not very interesting directing of Joel Schumacher, the bad set design, and the clearly uninterested acting that is obvious in terms of when you're watching the movie. I don't care how you edit this movie, unless you suddenly have so many scenes that have so much fucking more, which I doubt it. This movie isn't that good of a movie. Changing where exactly the scenes go and what is in there and what isn't has changed both Blade Runner and Rocky IV, and what I feel is the best versions to watch those movies. Everyone knows about the Blade Runner thing, but if you haven't seen Sylvester Stallone's recut of Rocky IV, absolutely watch it, because it's a better movie. It cuts out some of the dumb stuff. You cut out some of the dumb, a little bit too toyetic stuff, and you keep in some of the more serious stuff that may have been cut, and you change around some of the scenes. Maybe this would be a better movie, but it still would be Batman Forever. A movie that ultimately, script-wise and the ideas going into it, would still remain the same and would be a much less interesting and a little bit too goofy for its own good Batman film that can be fun. And I don't want to shut on it too hard. It can be enjoyable, but it's just not what it was supposed to be in terms of a third Batman film following the previous movies. There's a reason why people want to like pretend that the Schumacher stuff is in a different whole universe, because it just does feel like a different thing. But not only is it again the same Alfred, but clearly there are various references visually and dialogue wise that it's the same Batman. But it is not an actual successor in terms of like how it runs and how it's written and how interesting and nuanced Batman is and how it changes the viewpoint of Batman. This goes back to what people didn't want to see out of Batman, the more blue, goofier Batman that we really tried hard to get away from in the previous two films. It really just doesn't compare to the previous two films. Because it's not like Schumacher is incompetent. He can make an alright looking movie, and there are some good ideas here. People always talk about popcorn movies, and you just kind of sit there and watch it and have a little bit of fun. And this isn't even like hate watch ironic levels of like you just have to turn your brain off. But it is very much for, yeah, ha, superheroes, tee-hee, and that's what you'll get out of it. Again, not an awful watch, but it really isn't what people wanted. It's not what, I would have wanted from Batman. And obviously I was too young to really give a damn when this came out. When looking back at it, you're like, dang, I really liked what the previous two were doing. You come to list, you're like, this is a very different kind of movie. And it sucked that they were like, but keep going. We're selling these toys like hotcakes. Batman Forever was a success when compared to the previous one, and they immediately commissioned a sequel, rehiring Joel Schumacher and writer Akiva Goldsman, fast-tracking a production for a June 1997 target release date, which, is a little bit of a break between the 3-year gap which the previous ones were doing. Schumacher wanted to go even further into the comic booky, more for kids style than he was kind of leaning towards in the previous one. While working on A Time to Kill, the two guys that were in charge of this ultimately went more into something that would fit with the animated series, clearly forgetting the animated series was the way it was because it did a good job merging the dark parts with the more entertaining bits, doing a great job of it. And the fact that they were inspired by it is so weird considering how different this is compared to that. This movie is certainly not an episode of the amazing Batman the Animated Series going on during that time, considering the fact that the studio is the real reason why he decided to go in the direction he did. they were mandated to make it more toyetic compared to Batman Forever. Especially Mr. Freeze's blaster, thus the reason he uses it so damn much. You gotta sell that shit off of the store! O'Donnell coming back as Robin, Val Kilmer deciding to go somewhere else, so they decided to pick someone similarly famous. Schumacher wanted to cast William Baldwin, like he wanted to in the previous one, but ultimately chose Clooney, which Warner Brothers really wanted him to do, and he agreed with it due to seeing From Dusk Till Dawn. Understandable. Mr. Freeze, while they were looking for who they were going to pick, considered Ed Harris, Anthony Hopkins, and apparently Patrick Stewart, which would have been awesome, but then they rewritten a little bit parts of the script after casting our boy Arnold Schwarzenegger, putting him in a big old suit, putting blue LEDs all over the place, which nearly apparently leaked into Schwarzenegger's mouth and killing him, and putting prosthetic makeup, which took 6 hours to apply, probably made this one of his least favorite roles. Demi Moore, Sharon Stone, and Julia Roberts were considered for the role of Poison Ivy, but they gave it to rising star Uma Thurman. Thurman agreeing because she really liked the femme fatale characterization of Poison Ivy. Deciding that Batman and Robin also needed character number 3 alongside their team, they decided to bring up Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl, their immediate choice. 450 visual effects shots, 150 more than Batman Forever. Batman and Robin is notably one of the worst superhero films that exists. It is a movie that people have certainly enjoyed, but not for the reason that the movie wants it to. It is awfully paced, terribly written, all of the actors seem to be giving half of a shit throughout the film, and even though clearly some of them came on with the idea that they were making something good, they certainly ended production knowing that they have made a piece of utter garbage. Listen, Mr. Freeze is here and he's stealing some CGI, I mean diamonds. They learned that he was Dr. Victor Fries, a man who's looking to cure his wife, and is singing, "I'm Mr. White Christmas." Meanwhile, Wayne Enterprises' lab, they once again have a crazy person working there, and he doesn't like Bruce Wayne, and he's gonna do some weird stuff. He decides to take a little bit off the book of Max Schreck and kill his partner, Pamela Isley. The evil guy here, Jason Woodrow, who in the comics is also a plant man, is taking the super soldier drug, which apparently is its own separate thing. He didn't even make it. They don't even explain where it comes from. And he injects it into serial killer Antonio Diego, turning him into Bane. It's also Coolio is here and may have almost been Scarecrow? Sure. Either way, she almost dies, but plants bring her back, and she's like, "I'm sexy now," and kills him, and goes, "Bane, you're my boyfriend." As Batman and Robin are trying to lure out Mr. Freeze, they end up luring out Poison Ivy, who, again, always horny. Batman goes, "Cha-ching, cha-ching, I'm a buy you, girl." Bruce and Dick have a bit of a falling out, and he's like, "Stay in the manor and be in the subplot now. Batgirl's here, and she's Alfred's niece or something. She's sure here. Remember what you did in the previous one? She's doing that now." Poison Ivy and Freezy McChill start working together. And as Batman tries to stop their first little plan, Nora's little Freeze is essentially set off, and Mr. Freeze believes that it was Batman's fault, when it was in fact Poison Ivy. Freeze and Bane take over Gotham Observatory and turn the telescope into a freeze ray, and after Batman and Robin and now Batgirl suit up in the dumbest looking things of all time, Batman's able to take down Mr. Freeze and ultimately tells him, "No, it was clearly evil, lady," and he goes, "Okay." Thus, after Robin and Batgirl beat up Bane, Mr. Freeze gave up and willingly went back to Arkham, where he'll probably share the same cell as Poison Ivy. Wonder how that's gonna end up. Batman and Robin is an awful, stupid-ass movie that is never funny, except incredibly ironically. Similar to Catwoman, though better. I feel like not that crazy of a thing to say that Batman and Robin is a better movie than Catwoman. But it is an awful, stupid, badly written movie with just awful, ugly set design, bad directing, actors that do not give a shit the entire time, and it's just so ironically bad that it's totally worth watching. For entirely different reasons, Batman and Robin is a must-watch for Batman fans. You want to see how you don't do a Batman movie?
absolute goddamn lootly watch Batman and Robin. It's so funny and quotable. I love it because it is just horrendously bad. Batman and Robin did not do as well as the other one. It broke even and was the third highest opening weekend of 97, behind Men in Black and Jurassic Park Lost World. It broke even, but the bad reception of it is really why Warner Brothers went, okay, we see, and ultimately canned the sequel, which was being written. In the middle, while making the film, they were writing the fact that it was going to be Batman Unchained, not Batman Triumphant, as people often claim it to be, in which the fact that it probably would have been about Harley Quinn that wouldn't have been the Joker's lover, but would have been Joker's daughter, and working with Scarecrow, who again would have been played by fucking Coolio. This alongside the cancellation of the then being made Superman film, which again would have had Nick Cage as Superman, and hell, there might have been a bit of a cameo from that Superman in Batman Unchained, led to a big shift in terms of Warner Brothers' interests in exactly where DC was going to go and superhero films. There have been many ideas that were over the next few years, maybe some Robin film, a year one based movie, which Warner Brothers didn't want to make because prequels certainly won't make us money. But there wouldn't be a Batman film for a number of years after this, until of course 2005. Mind you, a Batman and Superman team up was apparently planned all the way back in 99, with it only getting some scripts written, because often scripts are thrown about all over the time, but it was pretty close to finally being made within its draft and how close it was going to be. But after scrapping it, they very quickly, of course, made Catwoman, quickly fast-tracking literally anything as though it seemed like superheroes were on their way out. The early 2000s quickly went, no, and thus we needed some kind of DC thing out as quickly as possible. Bring back Superman in vaguely related to our 70s one, and bring back something involving Batman, fast track whatever actress is closest, thus Halle Berry as Catwoman, make her some femme fatale, have her fight against lady who wants to make people be controlled by makeup? I don't know, get Sharon Stone. I'm not gonna talk about Catwoman, it's really bad. Halle Berry gets brought back by Cat Burp and plays basketball with a man that she wants to do. It's just funny that she showed up to the Raspberry Award. P.S. If you ever need a movie to show your friends to get drunk and just watch a bad movie, oh my god, watch Catwoman. But Catwoman's not really part of this. Halle Berry is shown as one of the past Catwomans, and that's the only reason why I'm mentioning Catwoman right now, by the way. Warner Brothers decided they eventually wanted to do something with Batman and decided to just pick whoever was the most successful director who wasn't doing anything at the time to just do whatever he wanted to find something that will fit in this early 2000s times of grittier, darker looking superhero films, when superhero films were suddenly becoming incredibly popular once more. Thus, eventually getting Christopher Nolan for Batman Begins, a story for another time. But all that was because of the fact of how badly took that this movie was by the general fan base, is that all of them hated it so much that now no one was sure what direction to go in for Batman. But besides maybe Catwoman, the Batman Burton Schumacher universe essentially ends right here. Batman 89 would have a comic all the way later on in the mid-2020s, in that we would vaguely see the initial idea of Marlon Wayans as Robin, known as Drake Winston, helping fight against Billy D. Williams' Two-Face, and Barbara Gordon is kind of important throughout the story. I actually really like it, and if it was ever adapted into a movie that attempts to look like Batman, which, considering what they did with Michael Keaton later in the movie I pretend doesn't exist, that probably won't happen. It got a sequel in 89 Echoes that is a little bit more confused. You know, Barbara Gordon is now Batgirl in the way I'd imagine she should have looked, and now Drake is Nightwing, who looks pretty cool, to be honest. Harley Quinn is just actually how Harley Quinn should be, which is a little bit less interesting than the initial idea, but they're trying to be more Burton than Schumacher, so okay. Alongside the, canceled Superman film, which I should have mentioned in my Superman video, that's my bad, I kind of would have loved to have seen where it would have went, but there is a damn good reason why Batman and Robin didn't do well.
And I'm glad eventually the series, after certain cancellations, eventually led to these slightly more interesting, if a little bit darker, but in the right ways, from both Superman Returns and then, of course, Christopher Nolan's Batman. I would say there are ways to do these characters to have it be more serious and not too dark, which is the reason why personally I don't like Man of Steel, but Superman is a different case. Batman needs to be a particular way, and while I feel like that particular way can be a bit of a mix of the cheesy stuff and the more comic booky ideas, while also keeping this darker, dreary nature that Tim Burton just did a great job doing. Those first two are incredibly great. I love their aesthetic and their characters, and Batman needs to look like either this or the animated series. Now, you can have your own interpretations, and not every Batman needs to be the same, but if I want to see like a modern day Batman, those are the two things that I want to see. If we're talking the two best actors who have played Batman, if it's not Kevin fucking Conroy, because it is, it's Michael Keaton, the very guy that people were actively kind of afraid would be ruining Batman. When if anything, he portrayed Bruce Wayne the exact way he needed to, and the more quiet and in his own way scary Batman that I feel like Batman needs to be portrayed as. See, I personally grew up with the Batman show, and that is often also what I kind of consider being the right way to do Batman. Not necessarily the best Batman, but a man who is capable of having a personality and is entirely different when he's out there as Bruce Wayne, and knows that the duality is an important part of his character, but also someone who is a respectful hero that knows what he's doing and the risks of it and does it despite it. Hell, I don't think Tim Burton's Batman is necessarily the right way all the time to do Batman, but it is absolutely a step in the right direction on how these movies should do it, and it did result in Batman overall, by most people, being known to be this more broody, scary man who is worth being frightened about when you are going to do something bad in Gotham City. And I can take the good with the bad with the Burton stuff over everything from the Schumacher stuff, which just not only takes what worked very well with Batman and kind of just, in both of them, consecutively making it worse, but aesthetically and writing-wise and pacing-wise, even without the weird edits that happened post-production with both of those films, the movies just don't hit it. They feel like someone trying to be Batman, and I don't know who these two guys are, but they certainly are not the same guy. I mean, canonically, yes, shut up, but it's just like I'd rather them not be. Again, I understand why people don't want them to be in the same universe, because having the Burton vs. Batman be a certain thing is cool. But it was fun going through this little quadrilogy and seeing it change over time. This version of Batman being these three different actors throughout these four different movies, but that is the Burton Schumacher universe Batman quadrilogy, right? As mentioned, all four I would recommend as superhero fans for their own various reasons. It was fun going through all four of these and seeing the change of the franchise and to see what I could really grasp out of all of them. I feel like I got everything I needed out of my system for these four Batman films. I hate that it took way too long to get to these movies, but here they are, and I had a fun time getting through them. I didn't talk about it, but also watch Birdman. It's a little bit of like Michael Keaton just made a whole movie about his experience about being Batman, kinda, and people mostly remembering for him as that, and how he's almost kind of like come to grips with that reality. So yeah, it's actually kind of a neat movie to watch. But if you enjoyed me talking about the Batman films, then go ahead and leave a like and leave a comment talking about your opinions on the actual best Batman movies and how wrong I am and how angry you are about the Snyder stuff. Again, it just adds to my viewership. So yeah, I agree. Oh, I agree. I'm so wrong about all of the Snyder stuff. Oh no. But more importantly, if you want to see me continue to be wrong about that, but more importantly, talk about more Arrowverse stuff and anything else I talk about on this channel, then go ahead and subscribe. But most importantly, stay good, stay safe, and don't be an asshole.